So, welcome to Only Load What You Need with Drupal 8 Libraries. This is me, I'm Zack Hawkins, or Media Current. We're a full digital service agency, and you might have heard this already. And we build lots of really awesome stuff for awesome clients. So, Drupal libraries, like how complex are we going to go in this talk? So here's kind of what we're going to do. The beginning will kind of start off kind of easy and pick it up a little bit, and then the last will kind of fall off a ledge. So if that's not for you, that's cool, because you can bounce like right about like the fourth bullet point. So an intro to Drupal libraries. It's like the new way within Drupal 8 to attach CSS and JavaScript to the page. You can see here that this is all we need. We got a name, we're global, it's the name of our library, and we're pointing it at the CSS file. And this base thing could also be base, layout, component, state, or theme. And that determines the weight of the CSS when it's loaded later. So if you had one that was base, one that was layout, and one that was theme, they'd be ordered like that. Or if you change one up, it would affect like the loading order. That's based on this max methodology, and I've never used this, like, to be completely honest. Like, I love max and methodology, but as far as like changing ordering with this, very most of the time it's just component or base, maybe layout every now and then, but it doesn't really come up that often. All right, so let's look at external files. So previously that was just this is our theme libraries file, declaring within here, and this is just pointing to a CSS file within the theme. We have an external file from another service. We can do that too. We have our library name, web fonts. We're telling it that we want it to go to the header by default. Well, of course, all CSS will go to the header, but by default, all JavaScript will be loaded in the footer at the bottom of the page. So if we have an edge case where we need it to be loaded at the very top, fonts, in this case, you can flag it there and let Drupal know to load at the very top of the page. We're also adding some other flags at the end to kind of let Drupal know what's up, telling its external file, and we're adding the async attribute, so the JavaScript gets added with the async attribute into it, so it gets loaded seamlessly. Does anyone know what's wrong with this? Anyone? Like, why is this bad?
Missing a dash.
Anybody? Tobias knows, but I'm not going to let Tobias answer. So this is like a shortcut. Like if you don't want to specify HTTP or HTTPS, you can just do the dash dash. And then if you load the website with HTTPS, then it'll still resolve. If you load it with just HTTP, it'll resolve. This is very much an aside. I just found it when I was looking for documentation, and I was like, that's bad, and we should point out why it's bad. The idea being that you never want to give the browser an option if one of the options is HTTPS. You want an HTTPS by default, so never let the browser pick if it's available at both HTTP and HTTPS. So, top tip. All right, so let's look at dependency resolution. This is probably my favorite part, I think, about Drupal libraries. So previously, this is from an actual project. We kind of had like one main SCSS file or CSS file if you're on that sort of project that imported all of our components and then output like a huge like just glob of CSS, right? And over the course of time, this only gets longer and even more fun. So even though the user may only hit one or two pages, they're loading all of the CSS or JavaScript for your entire website. And that's not good. So I know some people will be like, well, you know, if you just cut down on one of those images, like then you could load as much JavaScript or CSS as you want. But that's not necessarily the case, because the image is just downloaded and decoded, and that's it. The JavaScript and CSS has to be downloaded and actually parsed by the browser. So there's performance gotchas there. Drupal libraries lets you break apart the CSS and JavaScript assets and set up dependencies. So libraries can depend on other libraries. By default, Drupal loads only the bare minimum, which means out of the box, it doesn't load jQuery. So right here, we've got this carousel library, Slick, we're pointing it to the vendor CSS that goes with it, the vendor JavaScript that goes with it, and we're telling Drupal, hey, this depends on jQuery, we're going to use Drupal core's jQuery to load it up. Cool. And then this is our kind of custom CSS here. So we've separated this from kind of the Slick carousel vendor stuff. And we're pointing our custom library to our custom CSS, custom JavaScript, and we're telling it, hey, this depends on Slick Carousel, so it'll make sure that this one gets loaded before this gets loaded. Right? So make sure the JavaScript is loaded in the right order. The core Drupal thing, that's the default Drupal JavaScript that isn't included out of the box. You got to tell Drupal to include that. So that's stuff if you're doing Drupal behaviors, Drupal JavaScript behaviors, you have to load it. Otherwise, it doesn't load. And a good gotcha here, always test logged out of Drupal, because by default, if you're logged in, jQuery is available on the page. There's a lot of stuff that is available because the admin bar and other stuff loads it up as libraries. So you're like, hey, everything's working. And then someone else is testing it later and they're like, hey man, this slideshow is broken and it's something about jQuery is not defined. I don't know what the deal is. And that's why. It's because while you're logged in, there's a lot of stuff that's being loaded that you're not aware of, but it can kind of get in your way, I guess. Cool. So looking at our component structure and how we kind of break this up in our theme directory, each one of these matches up to a library in Drupal. So collection container, that would be a library, collection item, and so on. And one can depend on the other one if they need to. And this too, if you're using Sass, this is how we're doing it. So it'll compile into a specific CSS file just for collection item, collection container, and so on. So it's not one main.scss that's including the entire site for the stuff. Got a twig file here too, and JavaScript file, and keeping it like this is really nice because later whenever you're trying to edit it, you're in Chrome, right-click, inspect element. Hey, look, there's the class name, connected container. Let me see where that is. Open up the components folder, scroll down, like, oh, here it is, and here's the markup I need to modify. Here's the JavaScript I need to modify, et cetera, et cetera. And I also like this for kind of one-off components where maybe you don't really have a twig file to go with it in Drupal or something like that, or maybe you don't even have a CSS file. Maybe it's just like a little JavaScript utility that you built that's going to be used in multiple places. You've kind of got that added in as it can be its own thing too, and that maps to its own library. So those other components that depend on that can declare that as a dependency, and it'll get resolved. So it's a nice way of kind of abstracting it and breaking it up into smaller pieces so that it's easy to reason about, find stuff, modify it later.
Zack, what do you mean components can be only JS or CSS?
Well, just that, in my mind, it can be just a JavaScript file. And that would map over to a library that would be just a JavaScript file, or just CSS, like if that's all you need.
Yeah.
Cool, so now we're going to look at modifying libraries. Let's look at overrides first. So this is overriding the Drupal provided default CSS that's loaded for these things. So this is where it exists in Drupal, like this Drupal core, in the stable, stable thing. And we're pointing it at our custom CSS that's within our theme. So this makes sure that whenever the core CSS gets loaded, instead of loading the default stuff, it's going to load our stuff instead. And this saves us from having to do a lot of importance to override the CSS that's in the core theme that's already on the page. And in some cases, you're like, I know that I absolutely am not going to use the CSS at all. I think it's stupid, it's loaded. I can just tell it false, and it won't load that CSS at all. So same thing here with views. I'm like, no, I don't want any of that. Just telling it false, it's not going to load. Drupal 7, that was a pain to do. But in Drupal 8, it's a lot easier. Also, I'll just say note the path. So the little slash here at the very beginning is because that is outside of our theme directory. So this .info.yaml file is inside of our theme directory, right? And all of these files are inside of our theme directory, but these are outside, so they need the slash so you can reach them from your current directory.
So on those ones that you're overriding, are you copying and pasting the core one and just making little tweaks, or are you like placing it?
Yeah, in most cases it's just copying the core one over because we need to make modifications and then making those modifications. So,
But it's a cascading style sheet. Can't you just like add?
well, if I want it clean, and I know we're gonna eventually make major modifications,
Okay.
or we're not going to use a ton of it and we can get away with like deleting a lot of it. We can clean it up a whole lot. So that way, because I feel like once you add a few importance, then other people see it and they're like, oh, so that's cool. And then they add a few importance and then their friends add a few importance, and before long it's just a huge mess. Alright, so you can also replace or extend entire libraries. I've never done this, but I could kind of see the use case, I guess, which is if we had like a messages library that we wanted to use to replace the classy themes messages library. We can do this, which is anytime that library would be loaded, instead of loading that library or any of the assets associated with that library, it'll load our own library instead, which I guess could be good, maybe. And libraries extend where this, I could see a little bit more along the lines of, like you're saying, Derek, if you wanted to kind of override, using CSS to override maybe a few additional styles or something like that, you can kind of tack on your library to another library, which means you don't have to worry about any of the logic about when that library gets loaded. You just know that whenever it is loaded, your stuff is automatically loaded too. So you don't have to sort out any of the logic, worry about that. You're just tacking on maybe like an extra style sheet or something, some extra JavaScript, so that whenever classy progress the library gets loaded, yours does too.
Couldn't you just like make your library a dependency of that one? What would be the difference? So,
If you were making your library a dependency of that one, you would have to go into wherever theirs is declared at and edit it. In most cases, that would be like a contrib module
Okay.
or something like that. So yes, probably, but you probably don't want to.
okay.
Yeah. Right, so let's look at attaching libraries. So far we've kind of covered how to declare libraries, what they are. You can point them at JavaScript, CSS assets. How much fun was that? That was so much fun. Now let's look at attaching libraries. So I guess the kind of default way to can't even talk, attach it is in the info.yaml file, which is kind of the core theme file. And we're telling it, hey, here's my global stuff, here's my web font stuff. I want to load it on every page. I know it's going to be used everywhere. I need all my web fonts everywhere. I need my global styles everywhere. I'm going to use it everywhere. That's cool, I guess, but we've got a lot of libraries to load, and I sure don't want to load them on every page because they're only used on a few pages. And if you've ever opened up web dev tools in Chrome and you saw like the unused CSS stuff, and you're like, cool, let's look at how much unused CSS I have on my page. And you looked at it and it's like 90% is unused. And the tool is like, you could delete 90% of your CSS now and it'd be so much smaller. What it's not taking into account is there's a lot of stuff that is dependent on hover, on media query, on JavaScript inserting other HTML that needs that CSS. So it's really hard for a tool to be able to analyze to tell you exactly what CSS is being used on the page or will be used on the page. And that's why, that's where this article comes from. It's basically like, it's very difficult for a tool to be able to tell you exactly what CSS is there so you can automatically strip it all off. So only if there's a way you can conditionally attach it, because we're smarter than the computer, right? Like we know like if this HTML is on the page, it needs the CSS to go with it. So cool, all right, in our pre-process stuff within Drupal and our .theme file, we can pre-process the page and get some logic in there and attach the library then. That sounds like fun, right? Nah, like that's way too much work. No one will ever do that. We're not going to do that. So instead, we conditionally attach it in a template. So this thing up top, attach library, and then it tells you which library to attach. What this does is, whenever that template is actually loaded within the page, it lets Drupal know to attach the library, and then the library is attached. So if you have a home page, and you're only loading like a few templates, and each of those have their own attached library, and they don't have dependencies on all this other stuff, then it's only going to load the CSS and JavaScript and so on that go on those pages. So that makes it easy. That way you can just write out your templates, attach the library on the top, or forget to, and then notice it's broken and have to go back after the fact and attach libraries. Not that we've done that. But yeah, that's totally the easiest way to do it. So let's talk about aggregate. Do y'all get this joke? You get it? It's like a pirate. All right, sorry. Okay. So by default, Drupal 8 spits out two separate aggregate files. It spits out an every page aggregate and a dynamic aggregate. So these are two pages, home page, interior page, and you're not going to be able to see this, but the very top CSS file is the same thing on this page, not page, right? So that's every page one. It stays the same because Drupal knows that those styles need to be used across the entire site, so it adds all those styles into the same aggregate, so that whenever you go from page to page in your browser cache, that's not invalidated. You're not downloading that stuff again. So that's cool. The second one is dynamic, so you notice that one's actually different because we have different components loaded on the home page than the interior page. So that's cool, right? So you've got Drupal trying to figure out, all right, so this stuff is used globally, this site over, so we need to make sure that stuff goes into every page, its own file, and all the dynamic stuff that kind of gets generated. So we're helping the user out by only sending the user what they need, but also trying to be smart about it and setting them up to already have a nice bit of CSS cached on the next page. However, it's like so close, but we're not quite there yet because you can't add libraries from a theme library to the every page aggregate. So it's kind of a problem, right? No one really talks about this, but this is kind of a problem. Like, I have a lot of global CSS in my theme that I know is global and needs to be used everywhere, but there's no physical way that I can get that CSS into that every page aggregate. Like, that's a problem.
What's in it then?
Huh?
What's in the every page aggregate? It's not your theme CSS.
Module stuff. Yep. So the module can reach it. Modules, module libraries can add to the every page CSS.
Huh. Okay.
And I think this is mainly because it's still in progress. If you can see this really grayed out text here, it's kind of still in progress and they're working through it. So this is the part that isn't quite here yet, but there's kind of ways around it. So let's look at the ways around it real quick. So you can use the module. This is my least favorite way around it. Technically, you can use your own custom module, have your own custom library file, and you can point all the way from your module to your theme CSS. That works, totally works. I mean, it's like probably the worst idea though, because then you've got developers that are working on stuff and they're like, what the heck, like where is this CSS coming from? Like, where is it being loaded from? I see all the CSS in the theme, but I don't ever see it being loaded. Like, that sucks. So you can also pass a preprocessed faults flag on here, and it just won't preprocess it. Like, it'll just, Drupal will ignore it and kind of pass it on, which leads to, we got our every page aggregate, and we've got our non-preprocessed CSS, and we've got our dynamic page aggregate. So that actually gets around the problem, because every page will have our global.css file, and it works then. It stays consistent, URL doesn't change, it works. The gotcha here is that you need an additional step to perform the performance optimizations on that file that Drupal would normally do. So if you're using Drupal's like built-in CSS aggregation and minification stuff, right? Like, well, that's kind of on you now because it's just pointing it to a CSS file and telling like Drupal, like, don't worry about this file, we got this. But yeah, anyways, but it does work. You just have to plan for that. And that's it. Unless y'all want to go deeper. Do you want to go deeper? We were like, wow, that was way too easy. All right, let's look at something more, like slightly more complex. All right, no problem. So you want to use Drupal libraries to load multiple React components without duplicating code. Woo! Anyone? Nice. Now, the first part was just kind of an entry, and now we're getting to the good stuff. All right, so let's say we have a Drupal website. We've got some different React components that are loaded on different pages. And how do we deal with that in Drupal libraries together? So here's how I've done in the past, which is we've got a React components folder. And I kind of have these index dash components. So each of these is like their own little React application. And each one depends on React, of course, but it also contains its own little components. So the schedule contains like match lists and team, live match contains countdown, whatever standings contains just standings. It sure would be awesome if we're not compiling React into every single one of these and that we were able to separate out the commonly used code into its own bundle and then use Drupal to load that. So this is kind of what we want, right? We want the common React stuff, so like React DOM and all this library stuff, as well as just the stuff that's in schedule, just the stuff that's in standings and so on, right? Just the stuff that's in some live match. Man, that sure would be awesome. So we can use Webpack to pull out the common code. And most Webpack examples you see just have like a single entry point, but that's not necessarily the case. You can provide it with an array of entry points. So that's exactly what we're doing here, which is we're looking through this directory and we're finding all the index dash whatever .js files. And it's going to build an array of those. It's going to rename them because I don't want like the file to actually come out to look like that. I just want it to look nice. That you don't have to do that part, but I thought it was nice. And then that builds our entry points. And we pass it into our Webpack config there. And this is the important part down here, which is optimized chunk plugin. And we're just going to name it something. So in Webpack 3, this changes in Webpack 4, but in Webpack 3 you use Commons chunk plugin. And Webpack is smart enough to pull that stuff apart. In Webpack 4 you use split chunks, which is a little bit more performant and does stuff a little bit better, but the rest above that is exactly the same. It's only this part that's a little different. That's not too bad. I mean, as far as Webpack goes, like that's not too bad. Like Webpack, it's a lot of fun. And then in Drupal, here's what it ends up looking like. So you've got your React components library with all kind of like the global dependencies, right? Specifically for this case, we had like several polyfills that we also needed. And then here's kind of a common bundle, right? Because everyone needs React, right? Not everybody, I guess, but most people that use React probably need it. And the minify true is telling Drupal, like, don't mess with this. It's already good. And we're generating production builds for those files. So in React and Webpack, we're letting it know, like, all right, production mode. Make sure we load this up. And then here's our schedule component. It's got some CSS that goes with it too. Here's our schedule specific bundle, right? And the dependency, of course, is React component. So it's making sure that it's loading all the dependency of the schedule, all that fun stuff. So standings as well. Right. And then in Drupal, we've got a twig file, and it has an attached library that just makes everything, make sure everything's loaded up. It's got an ID of schedule, and in React, that's kind of our root DOM element that everything's attaching to and kicking off. And this means, like if you were to, put this in a block or something like that on a Drupal page, if that block is on one page but not on another one, or you have different React components on different pages, it'll make sure that all the dependencies necessary to load it are loaded on their respective pages. And if they're both loaded on the same page, then it doesn't load React twice. It's just loading that one kind of global dependency. Woo! And that's it. Questions? Besides Derek? No, Derek, you can go. That's
Okay. I was just trying to wrap my head around how that's different from, so let's say you didn't minify all the schedule components together, right? Schedule's made up of 5 components and the other one's made up of 5 different components. But like, if let's say you had a twig file for each of those separate components that each just depended on the React core or React comment or whatever, like why do you need to bundle them up into schedule? Like why can't you just include them with the individual component?
Because schedule is not one file. Schedule is like, in the React world, like there's a ton of components that go into schedule. So it's not just one JavaScript file. So when Webpack is compiling it, it's compiling it to one file. So you can just load one.
But I'm saying if we didn't compile and you just left them all separate things, each of those components, they correspond to Drupal components too, I assume. Is that some level?
Well, like the schedule would correspond to like a Drupal one.
Oh, okay.
You know,
Okay, I gotcha.
live standings or whatever.
But then could you just use like inside of the schedule library? Could you just list out each of those JavaScript files and then Drupal would compile it all for you?
Well, Drupal wouldn't be able to run Babel to actually transpile all this stuff from JSX to an actual production build of JavaScript.
Okay.
So that's where Webpack is stepping in and like, all right, Doc, I see you got JSX in there. We're going to go ahead and compile that into JavaScript that the browser will understand and resolve all your like node module dependencies and so on. Questions? Anybody?
Is the namespacing for libraries, is that now part of core?
You mean like the Twig namespaces?
Yeah.
I don't think so,
So there's still an extra
but it would
module.
be nice.
There's still an extra module you use to download.
Yeah, but for libraries that's just with includes though.
Okay. Yeah.
For just libraries, it would work the same because that's how core works. Cool. All right, well, last talk of the day. All right, thank y'all.